Hey everyone, Craig here, and today we're going to be looking at running AWX on top of OKD. So if you watched any of my other videos, you'll know that I've spent quite a bit of time setting up Overt and setting up OpenShift on top of Overt and getting FreeNAS and all that kind of stuff set up. And I really want to do something useful with this. And the way that I typically automate things and run bits of code in my environment is using Ansible, just because it's easy. There's loads of different ways to do it, but I've drank quite a lot of the Kool-Aid, so Ansible is the tool for me. And I know that quite a few people like Ansible and like to run it from a central place, and Red Hat have this tool called Ansible Tower. Ansible Tower is, you've got to cough up the bucks. For a home lab like this, you're not really going to pay for it. You're not going to have the business case for it, if you like, but it gives some really useful features. I mean, it gives you a way to see what jobs are running where in your environment, who run them, when they run them, what jobs are failing. It gives you a really nice overview of your environment in that respect. It even lets you see individual jobs and tasks and the detail that's going on. So if you run a playbook against your estate and 50% of it fails or something like that, you can see where it failed, how it failed, all that kind of good stuff, and you get some nice functionality around workflows. So if you've got multiple Ansible playbooks that you string together, maybe you've got one that provisions some infrastructure, maybe you've got another one that goes and talks to your DNS service, maybe you've got one that goes and talks to Cloudflare, maybe one that goes and talks to FreeIPA for your authentication, and then another one that deploys your actual application. You can bring it all together using those. They're pretty nice. And obviously you've got an audit trail. It's a bit less important for a home lab, but when you start talking about some of the enterprise use cases of this thing, enterprises want to be able to see, and especially in a regulated industry, you want to be able to see who did what, when they did it, how they did it, what they ran it against, exactly what commit of code that they were running from, and all that kind of good stuff. And Tower gives you those benefits. It gives you the capability and the flexibility to be able to do that. So obviously this is an enterprise product. Red Hat sell Ansible Tower. Lucky for us, when they acquired it, Red Hat are fantastic for open sourcing projects. Almost everything that Red Hat does is open source, and if you start digging around on GitHub, you'll see some of the tools that they use to monitor their OpenShift Online product, for example, the cloud service. So there's quite a lot there. And what they've done with Ansible Tower is they've set up this project called AWX. AWX is the upstream version, just like Foreman is upstream for Satellite, and OKD is upstream for OpenShift, and Overt is upstream for Rev. So they've set AWX up, and for a while AWX was kind of miles ahead. It was I wouldn't have considered it to be that stable. I wouldn't have considered it to be something that I would have really used, just because AWX was the new shiny future, and Ansible Tower, as it was at the time, was kind of it was stable. It did what it said on the tin, and it did it repeatably, which was good. AWX I didn't really have the confidence in. But now AWX is so much further ahead. It's brilliant. So they've got this really comprehensive project. You can go through, you can have a look at the source code for it, you can contribute, you can get involved, and you can see how Ansible Tower is built, and AWX is Ansible Tower. One of the good things that they've done here is this is a container first deployment, so you can run it in Docker, so you can set up a single host and run it using Docker, or if you've got an OpenShift cluster or an OKD cluster, you can deploy it there. And so that's what we're going to do today. So I've got my OpenShift cluster, my OKD cluster already provisioned for a while. I've been using this now for a little bit, and I've been having a little bit of a play with some of the operators and getting things like Let's Encrypt. So the OpenShift Acme project I'm using to deploy that. There's a blog post on eti.io that I wrote a while back on how to do that, and it holds true today. Dead easy way of getting publicly signed SSL certs. I'm doing things like having a little bit of look at KubeVirt. So there's some really nice functionality coming down the line with respect to virtualization and how Overt and OpenShift kind of deal with each other, and OpenStack as well, how they deal with each other when it comes to virtualization. So OpenShift has a function thanks to Kubernetes called KubeVirt, and that project allows you to run KVM VMs and use the Kubernetes schedulers and Kubernetes resources like storage and networking and scheduling and all that kind of stuff, and bring virtual machines into those landscapes. So where you've got workloads that are maybe partly a VM because it's really a ball ache to convert that workload into a container, or it's maybe just not a good fit to be in a container, you can bring that workload in to the same ecosystem using the same automation tooling and all that kind of good stuff as you have for your containers. And so it gives you a really powerful way of consolidating your infrastructure. Now, that on its own is like really, it's really forward looking, but I don't think it's massive. Like I wouldn't cut over to it yet personally, because I think it's a little bit too bleeding edge. But one of the nice features that they've put into it in the new version that's coming with Overt 4.4 is an integration layer between OpenStack and OpenShift and Overt and OpenShift. So if you use OpenShift's KubeVirt, the OpenShift virtualization product, you can plug that into your Overt cluster and use Overt as your scheduler, your hypervisor controller, and those virtual machines get they appear inside of OpenShift, so you can still control them as Kubernetes resources. It looks really cool. I haven't had my hands on it yet, but the concept is brilliant, and I think that Red Hat in general being challenged in the market by players like VMware, who, if you look at the projects that they're turning out at the minute, they've got a whole project, I think it's Pacific, that is dedicated to kind of aligning Kubernetes and getting Kubernetes into their hypervisor, so that you end up with this really efficient infrastructure that all is, you deploy in a standardized way, whether you're deploying virtual machines or Kubernetes or containers. But I digress a little bit with that. That was just something else that I've been having a little bit of a play with. I'm running GITLab Runners. Again, I've never really played with these, but I'm having some really good fun with that. What I've found is the GITLab Runners work really nicely out of the box, and I've actually been able to put together a pipeline to deploy OKD nightlies, just so I can have a little bit of a test and see if they work as I want them to, which has been really nice. Have run into some issues. So having run this, I think this cluster is about 2 weeks old now. I'm running on beta 4. Actually, no, it'd be a bit older than 2 weeks. So I think I did I just did a clean install. I thought I might have installed beta 3 and then upgraded it. I did do an upgrade, but I ended up blowing it away and putting it back and then restoring stuff in there, just to test that process out a little bit. But overall, it's a good stable release. Beta 4. There's a couple of little bits that could do with being tweaked. So out of the box, if you take a look at the machines and the nodes, where this says provisioned as nodes under the phase, I've had to manually trick it in the background a bit for this all to be hooked up and aligned, because out of the box what was happening is the machines were being provisioned, nodes were being provisioned, but they weren't lining up with each other, so the machine was never lining up to be a node. And what you've ended up got to do with that, if you go into the machine and the node, you've got to modify the spec so that you've got a provider ID, and the provider ID is literally the UUID that comes out of Overt for your virtual machine. And as soon as you put this in the spec for, this is a node, so if you put that in the spec for your node, and then if we pick one of the one of the machines and look at the same thing, we can see under the spec we've also got provider ID there. That doesn't exist for some reason from a fresh install, and if you scale up or scale back the machines, it doesn't seem to create it either at the moment. It's a bug that is raised on the forum, so they're aware of it, and I'm sure they'll resolve it in due course. It doesn't cause any functional issues, it's just a little bit awkward. It actually, I tell a lie, I think it does cause a functional issue, because the certificate approver for nodes and machines and stuff, that relies on there being a binding between the two. So if it can't find the machine in the provider that it expects to be there, then it won't issue the cert for it as a bit of a protection. That only seems to affect IPI. But you can quite easily go and manually approve those certs yourself using OC get CSR and then run it through Xargs or something to approve it. And once you do that, it's all good. But yeah, if you're running into the same thing where you've got a list of machines and your machines don't have nodes, they show as provisioned in the phase, just not provisioned as node, then just go ahead and do that. Add that provider ID. Anyway, I've gone off topic again, so I'll bring it back in. AWX. So what are we going to do here to get started? Well, we're going to need two things. So we've got the AWX Git project over here on GitHub, and we're going to clone this. So we're going to just grab that. We're going to clone that. I'm going to go over to, no, not you. And then what I'm going to do is git checkout. Oh, not git checkout. What am I doing? If I could be bothered to do a blooper reel, I'd stick that in the bloopers. So we'll clone this repo. So something to note about the Ansible AWX repo is they work off Devil, so they don't have a master branch, so they don't have a continuously stable branch. And what that means is that you need to go and look at the tags. So the latest tagged release, you can either look at tags there or you can go over to the releases page. The latest release is 11.2.0. So this is the tag we're going to use. If you don't use the tag, there's absolutely no guarantee that it's going to be stable. So just kind of keep that in mind, because I've run into some issues when I've deployed this, and initially I didn't realize that was how it was working. So I'd pull down the whole repo. Kind of, it seemed to be mid between them pulling out RabbitMQ for their runner bit, the job scheduler bit, and it caused me so many issues. And it wasn't until I realized that actually you're being a bit of a idiot here. You're not reading the document. You're not looking at what their install process is. You need to go and do this. So I did it that way, and it worked, which was great. So you're going to need to have, as a prerequisite here, you're going to need to have obviously OpenShift or Kubernetes already configured. You're going to need to have some mechanism for persistent storage. So if you're running on Overt, don't forget that you've got the Overt CSI driver that you can rely on for that. Otherwise, just set up a couple of localhost PVs or iSCSI PVs manually. You don't have to use dynamic provisioning. You just have to have some PVs available for it to consume. What else have we got? I think that was all I really needed to talk about before we actually start getting in. To be honest with you, I was hoping this was going to be quicker and I wouldn't have to ramble for quite so long. What else have we got? So, there we go. That's a relief. So if we change directory now into AWX, and in here, I'm going to then do git checkout 11.2.0 to make sure that we're on the right branch. There we go. And if we now change directory, change directory into the installer directory, because this is the only bit we really care about for a containerized build like this. If you're not developing it, you don't care really about the other files. You're also going to need to have Ansible installed, and I'm using, what version of Ansible am I using? 2.9. So if you run this on 2.9, you'll be all right, as you're about to witness, hopefully. So what we're going to want to do is, we don't care about build.yaml. That is, if you want to build your own container images to run this from, you can build it from source. You can generate it and push it up to your own registry. I'm just going to use the images that come, that the Ansible team are building. They're reliable, they're trusted, so that's fine by me. We're going to edit, if we look at the inventory, we're going to edit this file here. So the inventory is really what the configuration looks like. So because we're going to deploy an OpenShift, we're going to uncomment a few of these things. So we're going to deploy against api.b.cwws.land. Whoops. That we're going to deploy into the AWX project. You can obviously change that to be wherever you want. I'm not going to pass a user in here. I'll leave that blank. Skip TLS verify. I'm going to set to true because I don't have a trusted CA set up. I haven't bothered going to that extreme yet. I do want to, but not there. I'm just going to explicitly set Postgres empty dir to be false, because I don't want it to use ephemeral storage. I want it to store things for me. So the other assumption I'm going to make here is I'm going to go down to, where are we? PG persistent storage class. So this, I think, so for some reason in my other install config that I'm referring to here, I've got this set to an actual PV name, but I don't think that should really be a PV name. I think this needs to be the storage class. So I think we've got ours set to, whoops, what have we got it set to? If I look at storage, over at CSI SC. So that should do that. This will create a, actually let's set the PG volume capacity as well. That should set it to 5 gig. I think that should be plenty. I'm not going to set any of the CPU or memory limits here. Don't really need to. I don't care about a service account at this point, but we will set something else there. Don't need to change the Kubernetes ingress, and we're not going to change this because we're not actually using a Kubernetes ingress object. We're actually using just an OpenShift route. I've not tried actually deploying it with the ingress, so I'm not going to tell you to do that, but I know it works the other way around. So if we go through, what else have I got to change? Common Docker parameters. So if we go down here, we've got AWX is the task host name, that's fine. AWX web is the web host name, fine. Ports are fine. SSL cert, don't care about that. Docker compose, don't care about that. Next things I want to change is Postgres. So let's set the Postgres username. That can be AWX. We'll leave the database configuration the same. I'll be blowing this away anyway. You should change this just because it's good practice. I'm going to leave it there just because this is a test instance. It's not something that's going to persist. I'm not going to set the Postgres admin password. We're going to leave the admin username and password here the same as well. Again, I'm going to blow this away, so it doesn't really matter. I'd suggest probably a good practice here is you set it to something rubbish like this first and just use the provisioner to automatically set it to something rubbish and then go and manually change it afterwards once you've logged in. Just keeps it a little bit simple. AWS secret key, I'm just going to add some rubbish to the end of that. AWX official, no, so we're not using Ansible Tower, so we're not going to use the official logos or anything like that. We don't have any proxies set in the environment that are required. I do have a proxy running, but I'm not going to use it for this, not just yet. I might do another video on using proxies with things later if there's any demand for it. Don't need to do any of that with the CA. Don't need to change the project directories or anything like that. Because we're not going to need to persist anything. So this lets you persist your Git repos and Git clones and stuff like that. So if the AWX container stops, you can bring it back up and you don't have to pull all your code down again. I personally tend to pull my code down and just assume that Git is always there, because Git is one of those services now in any kind of environment that it just always has to be there. It's just so key to everything. So I'd rather pull down my code every time I run a job just to make sure I've got the latest version or latest tag or something like that. And really, it's not too big of a deal if you're pulling it down once a day or something like that, you know, if you end up restarting AWX. But that should be everything that we need. So the next thing that we're going to do is I'm going to make sure that I'm just going to authenticate to the OpenShift cluster here with qconfig. And what I'm going to do is just literally make sure that we create that new project. So OC new project AWX. It's a little bit annoying that it doesn't create it out of the installer, but that's all right. It's not the end of the world. I'm going to want to, let me just find my note, create a SCC for this. The reason why we create the SCC, why do we create the SCC? There's something that doesn't work if you don't do it. Let me refer to the documentation for a change. Install prerequisites. There we go. Yeah, so this is the install doc. So you can refer to this to go through. We're doing an OpenShift install, so we have to create a privilege. Add the service account to the privilege security context, because there's obviously a tool there that it requires. Ironically, it's so that you can add more security. So let's go through and do that. We can have a little bit of a play with Wazir as well. So we'll add the privilege policy. So it's literally just OC ADM policy. I'm going to add SCC to user. The SCC that we're adding is called privileged. We're adding it to the service account default. So -z is just shorthand for the whole system : service : AWX : and then the service account name default. And we're going to do that in the namespace of AWX. There we go. Okay, so we should now be able to do Ansible playbook. And this token hopefully is expired. So what I'm going to go and do is just grab a fresh token. So hopefully, in fact, OC who am I -t, no token, outrageous. Copy login token. There we go. So your login token is absolutely a secret, so don't share that with anyone. Certainly don't put it in a YouTube video. Okay, so what we'll go and do here is, whoops. If anyone's wondering how I'm searching backwards there, I'm literally just typing Control and R and then start typing the thing I'm looking for. It's quite a handy little tip. Okay, so we're in a good place now. We're in the installer directory. We've got Ansible installed on our local machine. We've got our valid token for OpenShift. We've got an OpenShift user created. What I haven't done yet, purely because I'm trying this out, is I haven't created that PVC. I'm interested whether the installer is going to do it this time. I think I might have misinterpreted what the installer was, what one of the configuration things in the installer is. So let's find out. So literally providing this with OpenShift user variable to tell it which user to execute this as, and I'm passing it in an OpenShift token. You can pass a password in if you want. I prefer passing a token in because it's temporary. So let's run it. So I can tell you now, the first time round, this never works. The reason why it doesn't work is it waits for Postgres and it tries to validate the version of Postgres. Here we go. Okay, so it didn't actually provision for us. So let's have a little look at what's going on here. So if we go to, where's our workloads and pods, if we go into the AWX namespace, okay, so there's nothing there in terms of pods. So let's have a look at the PVCs. No PVC. Okay, so the installer isn't actually creating the PVC for us. I thought it might have done, but never mind. So it's asking us to create a a PVC named PostgreSQL in the AWX namespace. So let's do that. So PostgreSQL, we're in the AWX namespace or in the AWX project, and I'm literally going to give it 10 gig. You probably want to give it a bit more than that if you're going to use this on a kind of a longer basis than a few hours. 10 gigs going to go quite far. The database doesn't get huge or anything like that, but obviously the more jobs that you're running, the more data it's got to store, the more configuration it's got, the more data it's got to store. So just kind of keep that in mind as you go in. Okay, so this is going off and it's provisioning the volume for me. So this is a really good example of a bug I keep running into with the overt CSI driver provisioner. So literally we've got this error message here where it's saying the storage class has an unknown code, description code, unknown error code, unknown description, tag not matched, and it's starting to return some HTML for some reason. And if we go to overt CSI driver, so for some reason, if we go to the overt CSI plugin, which is kind of the root of everything for your CSI storage for overt, you'll have a look in here and it'll be failing to actually do anything with the volumes, which is really strange. And even if you delete just this pod, you're still going to end up with issues. So what I've found that I've got to do is literally go and OC delete pods all -n overt CSI driver. So delete all of the pods in this overt CSI driver namespace. These node pods here, these are the things that are actually running on your worker nodes, and they're controlling the attach, detach of volumes. And so one of these, I'm not sure which one it's going to be, but one of these is going to be tripping up and just kind of going, nah, I'm not really comfortable with that. Can't do it. It might be this one. No. I'm not really sure why it does it. I've just realized I'm looking in the wrong place. There we go. But yeah, I'm not going to go through all of the logs. Don't think there's a lot of value in it, but one of these you'll find that whichever node it is that it's trying to assign the volume to, it'll be kicking up a load of logs under the overt CSI driver container running in one of these node pods. Here we go. Said I wasn't going to go through them, did anyway. And you can see here that there's stuff going on. You know, it doesn't look bad. In fact, this one definitely doesn't look bad. This isn't even from now. This is an older one, so you can see that it was working at some point. Let's try this one. No. Yeah, anyway, it's not working. But one of these will have a bunch of error messages in it as well. And so literally, if you just go and delete all the pods, and then if we quickly jump back to the AWX namespace and watch the PVC, as soon as those pods come back up, this will bind. It's a really weird behavior. I don't fully understand why it's doing it. It's not even anything to do with using the OVN Kubernetes network provider either versus the OpenShift SDN network provider. It was happening. It happens on both, so it's not like it's a weird connectivity thing. And there's certainly no routers or firewalls or anything between these nodes. So yeah, is what it is. There we go. Bound. Okay, so we can go back to back over here, and if we go back and run our Ansible playbook again, one of the beauties of Ansible is you can run the same playbook. If you craft your playbooks right, they should be idempotent, which means you can run them against the same set of infrastructure. And as long as you've crafted them in the right way, you should be comfortable and confident doing it, just to validate that A, you've applied some settings in the way that you thought you did, and B, if you do end up failing partway through something, you can rerun it and it will continue from where it picked up, from where it dropped off, which is quite nice. Okay, so this is going to deploy Postgres. I'm sure on a faster, somewhere that has a faster internet connection would probably be better, and this will probably work, but my internet connection here sucks. So this will be, the majority of the time here is just going to be pulling this pod down. So I'm going to let this pod pull and then I'll come back. All right, so we're back. We've got the Postgres containers up. So if we look at the logs, we can see that there's happy stuff happening. The container itself is running. And if we go over to details, we should see that it says ready somewhere. Can't remember where it says it, but it says ready somewhere, which means that it's meeting its health checks. So that's really good. That means that we're pretty much ready to... Oh, there we go. If in doubt, go up a level. Yeah, so we're ready to go. So if we go back to our shell window here, we can see that we got an error during check if Postgres 9.6 is being used. It timed out, and it timed out because Postgres just wasn't ready for it to do that check. So let's rerun the playbook again. There we go. So it's done that. It's now starting to apply some of the deployment configuration. So what the installer tends to do is it spins up this pod called Ansible Tower Management, and it uses this pod to really interact with the rest of the Tower service. So any configuration and stuff like that needs to be applied, it spins this pod up, and this pod then interacts with the rest of it. It's quite a nice way of doing it. It seems fairly reliable. So if we go back here, so what it's doing now, what's it been doing? It's deployed, create some deployments, config, rendered some templates, grabbed some images, though it skipped that bit. Does some stuff with the management pod, waits for that to come up. Now it's migrating the database. So it's literally now making sure that all the database changes and what have you are applied. So as a process, this seems to be a bit faster as well than the old setup.sh that you used to have for Ansible Tower. And it's consistent. I'm not going to say it works every time, but it's consistent. So we'll let this do its thing, and then we'll come back once it's finished running through. Ooh, interesting. All right, so it's failed, and it's failed while it's trying to create a Django superuser. All right, let's run it again. Let's see what happens. I think I've seen this one once before. It doesn't normally do it. Usually it's because the system isn't fast enough, as in it's not able to do whatever thing it's requesting fast enough. Which for this seems to be fairly accurate. Oh, the other thing, while I think about it, that I've noticed with OKD, which is actually a known issue, is sometimes your nodes will go to a not ready state, and that seems to be due to disk performance. The kubelet just stops talking for some reason. Restarting the kubelet sorts it out. No other issues apart from that. It's a known issue if you go to docs.openshift.com. So actually I'll get that up for you. I'll show you. So if you go over to docs.openshift.com, 4.4 has actually dropped, which is great. And if you go to, I think it was in the release notes, I spotted it, known issues. There we go. Known issue. So there's a known issue with MCO, with the machine config operator, to do with proxy configs. So that doesn't really impact us at the moment. Proxy. There was something to do with rev here as well. Where was the rev one? So rev over interchangeable. Here we go. There's one here about scaling up a machine set that it never exits provisioned phase, which causes the machine to never run. That's not totally accurate. The machine does run, or certainly from what I've been seeing, the machine starts and it runs, but it never goes into node, provision does node phase, which is what we were saying about earlier with the provider ID. Auto scaling fails due to cluster resource computation. I haven't seen that one. Instance, so that could be related. Where is it? There was literally something about. So there's now a nice installing on rev. section here. So if you want to follow the docs through, you can do. There's some nice examples and things like that. And it looks like there's also a way now to override the template config. So you don't have to go manually change it. You can do it here now, which is really cool. That's really good to see. But yeah, there was a known issue. I'll see if I can dig it out. There was a known issue that I read last night. I don't think I was imagining it. Yeah, troubleshooting common issues. Hang on, installing Rev with custom. Here it is. It's hidden. So here, CPU load increases and nodes go into a not ready state. So this I've been seeing quite a lot. I've seen this a few times, and I've had to. You can reboot nodes or you can restart the kubelet. Both works. Probably less impact to restart the kubelet. But yeah, a little bit weird. Just thought it's worth calling that out. Anyway, back to the scheduled show. So this is still waiting for the management pod to start. Excellent. Why is this taking a while? Oh, it's pulling it down. Okay, we'll let this do what it's got to do and then come back. Oh, that was the skin of the teeth. Yeah, so I've realised that I had an issue. I've got a pulp sync going on in the background, so it was hogging all the bandwidth. So that's why this is taking so long to pull down. So yeah, maybe if I stop that, the provision will actually work. So let's see how this goes. So it's going to try and migrate the database again to make sure the database is up to date. Okay, we're back, and this is getting boring now. So it failed to create the default organization. Okay, I swear this ran first time last time. First time every time, just run nicely on my laptop. I wouldn't care. I did have an environment already set up, an AWX instance already set up in this namespace, but I deleted it purely for this demo, and the demo gods are not shining on me today. Right, let's see what happens here. So it's going to delete the management pod. Alrighty, so I've effectively, I don't know what was going on with that build, but I've just had my mouse has run out of battery. Let's hope I can do this demo before the mouse actually dies. So I've had a full build run through. Effectively, what I ended up having to do just then was delete the AWX namespace and start again. And I've done that, and it's worked first time this time. I don't know if it's just because I had some pressure on my internet connection and containers weren't being pulled down in the right amount of time. I can only guess that's what it was. But as you can see, it's gone through all the way now end to end. And I'm kind of rattling through this. But the points where it was dropping out before, it's not dropped out again. And it's run the whole way through. In fact, if I go all the way back up, I should get to... So this is the failure we had before. I've gone and re-added the policy. I've created the namespace. I did end up deleting the CSI driver pods again because I had an issue when I was provisioning the Postgres data store, Postgres PV. But other than that, it's gone all the way through. These red bits that we're seeing are the expected red ones that it ignores. Oh no, hang on. I scrolled too far up. Okay, no, I had one failure, which is the Postgres 9.6 check, which I expected to see, and then ran it a second time, and it ran all the way through, unless I've scrolled too far up. That red one is the one we expected to see. Yeah, ignored. Good. And this red one was one we expected to see, ignored, which is the tower CPU routers. Then it goes and creates the admin user and yada, 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 does a load of stuff. Okay, so if we go to the root and literally just go and hit this, and it's going to do some annoying stuff. Thanks, Chrome. that this is quite annoying from Chrome. You used to have a button that you could click and say, yeah, ignore it, I trust it, but that's gone away. So what I'm going to do, if I go over to my blog and go to dynamic SSL certs with Let's Encrypt, and shameless plug, I know, I'm literally just going to grab this annotation here. So kubernetes.io TLS acme true. I'm going to go to our root. Don't even need to edit the annotation. I'm just going to edit the root YAML directly. Post it in. Paste it. There we go. And this will go ahead and create a proper SSL cert for me. It's worth calling out, I do have the Let's Encrypt operator running already, which is really cool. So if we now go back here, I should refresh it and hopefully get a cert. Yeah, there we go. Fantastic. That's a great tool. So here we go. We've got AWX. We've got Ansible Tower. So one of the nice things that we can do here is we can go and change the root. You can change the host name, so it doesn't have to be the default one. I'd suggest moving it off default, just in case, especially if you've got your cluster on the internet. Security from obscurity or by obscurity isn't really security, but it helps a little bit, especially when any route that you go and hit on that IP address is going to give you some kind of response. Having it a little bit obscure will help. So I'm going to log in with admin and password. And here we are. We got Ansible Tower. So we got our nice dashboard there. We've got inventories that we can configure to get things up and configured. So I'll tell you what, let's go to overt. And I'm really quickly going to provision a machine. And we can do something with it. So if we go to new VM, I'm going to provision in Serenity. I'm going to use my management CentOS image. It's going to be a server. I'm going to call it testing1234 .dmz.uk.cws land. I'm going to put it on the DMZ. There we go, DMZ network. Don't need to worry about any instance images at the moment, because we're going to get a default disk created from the template anyway. Memory size, let's give it 4 gig. 4 gigs. So nice little thing that you can do here is literally just type 4 and then G and then tab, and it'll kind of auto calculate how many megabytes there are in that gig, however many gigabytes. We'll give it 4 cores just because we can. We want to use Cloud Init or sysprep for this to actually prepare it. So we'll configure the time zone. So I'm in London, so I'm going to hit London. Authentication, we're going to create a user called Bob, and we'll have a password called password. And I'm not going to worry about an SSH authorized key at the moment. Don't need to worry about a custom script, though you could use this to do an IPA client install or some kind of other enrollment to an LDAP service if you wanted to. Don't need to worry about any network configuration because I've got DHCP on the network on this particular subnet. Don't need to worry about any of that. I think that's good. So let's hit OK. And where's testing? There it is, testing 1, 2, 3, 4. So it's provisioning the disk for us. I'm just going to go in quickly, and once this disk is finished, I'm just going to expand it a little bit to 20 gig or something, just out of habit. 8 gigs, all right, it'll boot. In fact, no, I won't expand it. I'll just leave it as it is. Okay, so while we're waiting for this to work, let's go and configure Ansible Tower. So we're going to create an inventory here, and we're going to call it our test inventory. So if you hit the little plus icon there, type inventory, we'll call it testing inventory. We'll leave it in the default organization for now. Organizations let you do some nice logical grouping, but I won't talk too much about that here. And I don't need to set anything else here. So if we hit save, we'll just do a really basic test just to prove the functionality. So if we then go to hosts, so you can do some nice things as well, like having dynamic inventory back to over. In fact, no, I haven't got a user set up, so I won't do that yet. I'll do another video on that. So we'll create our host. So our host was called testing1234.dmz.uk.cws.land. So the DNS name ain't going to work for this. I know that because I haven't put it in DNS. So what am I going to do about that? Well, I'm going to set the IP address, and I can't remember the IP var. So Ansible IP address. I think it's something like literally Ansible IP or something like that. There we go. So if we add a vine here called Ansible host. Now you wouldn't normally do this. It's literally because, in fact, we haven't got an IP address for this instance yet. Anyway, have we? No. So let's start that up. So yeah, what we'll do here is we'll keep the nice pretty host name. So because normally you'd want to use DNS to resolve these things. So it makes sense, the host that you're trying to hit. And what I'll do is I'll put the IP address here as a variable, a host variable for this specific host. Normally you wouldn't do this. This is pretty bad practice. But just for the kind of demonstration here, it kind of makes sense. So we go back to Ansible Tower here, 10.50.104.22. And then I'm literally just going to go and save that. Oh. Let's try again. Helps if I do it in YAML format. Okay, so we've got our host. Now, if you want to do something with this, we can literally, well, we're going to need a credential first. So let's go to the credentials tab. We'll create a test credential. So we'll call it test SSH password. We'll assign this to the default organization. We're going to set the credential type to be machine. There's lots of different credential types here. So you can do some nice things like integrating with HashiCorp Vault and things like that, which is really cool. But in our case, we're just going to use this machine type here. Okay, there we go. Username is Bob, and password is password. You can do some nice things here like prompt on launch. So if you want your users to authenticate to machines based on their own credentials and do things with their own credentials, so you can see who's doing what at the SSH level, you can do that too. So you can ask the user to provide their credentials at that point, rather than using a centrally provisioned set. It all depends on what your kind of flows are. But let's save this. If you want to escalate privileges, so in this case we will, I'll just plumb in sudo and don't need to set a username or anything like that. If you're using PB run power broker or anything like that, you've got some nice functions there to be able to support that. We'll just use sudo. There's no sudo password, so I won't stick that in there either. But if you needed to change between usernames, you can do that too. Okay, so if we go back to our inventory and we go to our test inventory and then we select our first host here, and so I've checked the box and then I'm going to hit run commands. Now this is a really nice feature of Ansible Tower or AWX, because it gives us the capability to run ad hoc commands across our estate. We can run it on one host, on multiple hosts, whatever. So in this case, if I do uptime, let's do uptime, and then we're going to select a machine credential for test SSH password. Don't need to worry about forks. That's just how many concurrent processes or how many concurrent connections it will run at the same time. Let's do a privilege escalation as well, just to prove that out. So set the credential, set the argument. The argument in this case is literally the shell command that you would run. So uptime, you run it in a shell, you get the uptime. So let's hit launch. So what this is now doing is it's spawning a job, and it's spawning a job in an Ansible container. I don't think it's a separate container. I think it's one that's already there. And literally it's going to go in SSH to this machine. And there we are. It's done it. So you can see we connected to testing1234.dmz.uk.cws land. and it's got 7 minutes uptime. And if we compare that to overt, 7 minutes uptime. So there you go. That's how you can do it. If you want to start storing your Ansible code in Git repos, that's where projects come in. You can start doing some nice things with your inventories from projects as well and sourcing them out of projects. But you can do some really nice things here. Generally, you'd set up a Git inventory. So something off github.com maybe you stick in there and sync your automation codes here. I'll go through in a bit more detail at another time about how to actually use Ansible Tower, because there's some really nice things you can do with it. And once you kind of get into a mechanism of loading jobs up and things like that, Red Hat have literally just announced a collection to allow you to do it, which is great because it's been quite difficult to programmatically put jobs and templates and inventories and credentials and all that good stuff into it. So it's really good that that's coming. But I just wanted to kind of give you a basic overview of what this is and how it works and that kind of stuff and how to deploy it, most importantly, so that you can have a little bit of a play with it yourselves. So hopefully that has been interesting and useful. If it is, let me know in the comments, like, subscribe, share it with your mates, all that kind of good stuff. If you didn't like it, let me know. Tell me what I did wrong. I've always got something to learn, so let me know. Anyway, thank you very much, everybody. Hope this has been good and speak to you soon. Bye-bye.